Good evening, everyone, and welcome to AG Talks. AG Talks is an online interactive series designed to allow us the opportunity to engage with the AG on some pressing matters, Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi, that he and his office would have responsibility for. So today we're going to focus on matters related to the protection of women, their rights, their freedoms, and the vulnerable in society as well. Good evening, AG.
Good evening to you, and good evening to the world from Trinidad and Tobago. It's wonderful to be in this space and in this audience, and thank you for being our initial host and placing your mark. We couldn't think of anybody better than you to be the host of this event, so thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. You know, usually I'm the one who would say welcome, but in this case I have to say thank you for opening your doors and allowing me the opportunity to ask a number of serious questions on behalf of the general public as it relates to the rights of women and the vulnerable in society. So let's get straight on to it. So protecting women, it's a very broad topic that we can go on for hours, but we're going to narrow our focus this evening and, deal largely with a few key pieces of legislation, namely the Firearms Amendment Bill, or the Pepper Spray Bill as it's most commonly referred to, the Sexual Offences Bill, the bills which deal with the National Registry as well as the websites for persons who are convicted as well as for persons who are charged. And we'll also touch on issues such as voyeurism and revenge porn and those kinds of matters.
Thank you. Well, let's just say the vulnerable. That's what we're about. And the intention behind the AG Talks, the series that the government intends to engage in, is quite simply because we believe that issue orientation is absent in our society, and that far too often the philosophy is almost as if it's just opposition and government that ought to agree upon something. The stakeholder voice is absent. And I think that therefore throws out a challenge to those of us who have the mantle for the time being to orient the issue, hear from people. It's more about what the people feel, want, and deserve in this complex universe, because law is boring, or law is viewed to be challenging, it's viewed to be problematic, it's viewed to be something that people can't understand. So the idea here is, what can we do for vulnerable people? And I can tell you that we have about 23 pieces of law. We'd like to focus today on these very areas that you've brought forward to us. So we're talking about sexual offenses. Sexual offenses is for the vulnerable: children, women, men. And the sexual offenses that we're looking at, the registers, the convicted persons register, whether we should have a discussion about people who are on charges for serious sexual offenses, whether we ought to introduce, as we want to, the concept of taking and sharing intimate images or videos and make that an offense, that is revenge pornography, humiliation, embarrassment, threats, ransoming, the concept of bail or no bail for those serious matters, what we call forked lightning, grievous sexual offense and kidnapping, grievous sexual offense and trespassing, grievous sexual offense and assault. And then we want to get into, okay, let's operationalize our pepper spray. Pepper spray, as we were chatting a little bit earlier, some people believe it's just for women. No, it's for the vulnerable in society and people who qualify. So I'm really anxious to get into this and to ask people to remember that law is very dynamic. The question is, are you prepared, Trinidad and Tobago, to stand up and voice an opinion when there is a lot of activity that says we want more, we want protection, but when you get down to the realities of how to achieve it, it can't just be a government and opposition, because some of this is special majority law and requires a 3/5 passage.
So let's start off where you just ended off, with pepper spray, the legalization for the use and the carriage of pepper spray. What is pepper spray?
Okay.
It's a non-lethal weapon. It's basically a chemical spray that allows victims to have a fighting chance, to slow down their perpetrators, to buy some time. Why was this placed under a firearms bill?
Okay, so pepper spray non-lethal protection is something that the society has been clamoring for. It's been experimented with in many countries around the world. Most countries have a licensing regime for it, and we intend to put a permitting regime as well. It falls under the Firearms Act because pepper spray is a noxious substance. So tear gas is a noxious substance. Tear gas is treated with under the Firearms Act. And pepper spray, being a derivative of something like tear gas, if you look at it, falls under the Firearms Act. What we did is we simplified the law. We said those things which are permitted by the minister, the volumetrics, the type of canister, the potency, those things will be permitted. You make an application to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, which is intended to be online. You fill out online your name, address, etc., and that you're not a prohibited person. Who's a prohibited person? Somebody on a sexual offences charge, somebody with convictions for sexual offences, somebody who has a domestic violence matter, and the court says no, those are prohibited people. You get your permission from the police in quick time, and then you fill that prescription at a pharmacy or a firearm user's dealer, and therefore you have it. We have criminalized the use of pepper spray in the commission of an offense. Why? Some of the data tells us, if you look at Denmark, for instance, where they legalized pepper spray and then had to repeal the law, pepper spray fell into the hands of criminal elements and can be dangerous. So we've sought to heavily criminalize it.
What strength of pepper spray are we going to have in Trinidad?
It's going to be the non-military grade pepper spray. Those details are being mapped out as we speak right now. So the Commissioner of Police is in discussions now. Minister of National Security should, in a matter of days, issue the order, which will tell you the strength that is allowed in this area. We're looking at the United States in particular as to the types and versions that exist. As soon as that's done, we're drafting the forms right now. The idea is that we'll operationalize this law in a matter of weeks.
So is it going to be non-military strength across the board? Because, I mean, while pepper spray, we're focusing here today on it being used, women using it as well as the vulnerable, it's also going to be for law enforcement as well.
Law enforcement will be permitted a different type. So we've excluded law enforcement into a different category. They will have different areas, including tasers and other non-lethal positions. Remember, we're reforming the police interaction with the public in a number of ways. Non-lethals is one of them. Pepper spray of a higher grade and potency, yes. Tasers, body cameras, all of the GPS monitors. The Commissioner of Police has spoken to us already about putting special license plates onto police cars in advance of the reform of license plates that we're doing, which is another area I'd like to jump into because it's about vulnerable. We're talking about the PH taxi industry and all registered rental cars, maxis, taxis, etc. So we're changing out all license plates to an RF tag ID, but the police will be in advance of that. So the police have non-lethal structures, tracking structures, and this allows us a better chance at the balance in society between the legitimate use of force, the protection of police officers and law enforcement officers, but also making sure entities like the Police Complaints Authority have a balanced watching sort of interaction on the use of force or the location of police.
So getting back to civilians, how old do you have to be able
16
to apply?
years and above. If you're 16 years old and your parent or guardian or person with responsibility applies for it together with you, that application can go in. We felt that it was important that school children had a chance at this. Obviously, the education system is going to come in because you certainly don't want to have pepper spray sitting inside of the school where boys may be boys, where school violence may erupt and pepper spray becomes an incident. But our schools are not unaccustomed to the management of devices right down to your telephones. So 16 years and above, with consent, prohibited people not allowed. Prohibited people being people on serious charges, domestic violence matters, etc.
So how exactly is the use or misuse of pepper spray going to be managed? I mean, should it be viewed as a shield or a sword?
It's both. I'm a huge advocate of martial arts. It's something that I've spent a lot of my life doing. I believe that your situational awareness is your first line of defense. Are you careful where you are? Sometimes you can do all the right things. Take the right car, the right route, the right timing, etc., and still be a victim. Being able to handle yourself physically doesn't have so much always to do with your size or your prowess. It starts off with your alertness. It can be a sword, it can be a shield. I want to remind that education and physical training and awareness are your starting points in this. And if parents are going to apply for their children to have this, you need to also make sure that there's a certain amount of training and a degree of conscious awareness. The government will be doing its part in that regard as we roll it out.
But how is this going to work in a domestic situation? 16-year-olds and up, that's fine. But once it's in a domestic situation, you have pepper spray in the home. You have younger children in the home. I mean, pepper spray needs to be within reach because you never know when you're going to need it. But at the same time, it has to be out of reach for certain persons within the household because, I mean, children are curious. They're going to want to pick it up. How is that going to work out?
Well, the data tells us, and the newspaper reports tell us, that pepper spray is in Trinidad and Tobago. So we have a transitional clause already that you can come in and legalize or get permission for the pepper spray which you have. The fact is, parental responsibility is built into the legislation. It's part of the Children's Act, keeping children away from alcohol, from tobacco and pepper spray, firearms, etc. These are all features of the law. That's why we said that we wanted to go with a permit first as opposed to legalization. Many of the members on the independent bench were insistent that we ought to legalize certain types of pepper spray. We pointed out to them that it was almost an impossibility to test which canister would be different from what. What is the difference between military-grade pepper spray and the other pepper spray? So there are safeguards built into this. Pepper spray is something that is going to be on test, and let's see where it gets to. There are certainly pros and cons.
You know, I've received some comments with women saying that they want pepper spray simply because, you know, they're tired of walking on the streets, being heckled, being harassed, and so on. How do you feel about pepper spray being used in these kinds of situations? And, you know, what is the difference between being threatened or feeling threatened?
Well, quite interesting that you raised this because it is associated with the other stuff that we want to discuss tonight. Nobody's hanging the protection of the vulnerable on pepper spray alone. It's a combination of events. We have in Trinidad and Tobago taken some simple but important steps to change the dynamic. Opened a children's court, a family and children division, dealt with a special criminal court and context. We now have magistrates courts that are very different from the magistrates courts of 2015, where we have registrars, we have case management, we have criminal proceedings rules. In this structure of pepper spray being utilized, you spoke about heckling, you spoke about harassment. That's why tonight we want to touch sexual harassment. We want to touch heckling in the form of voyeurism. We want to touch taking and using images, etc., that can reduce the savagery upon the vulnerable. Nobody ought to be feeling vulnerable. A young lady walking down the road ought not to be subjected to inappropriate conduct. And therefore, the combination of these things are there. Obviously, you can't whip out your pepper spray and use it as a weapon in other than self-defense. Self-defense is a careful concept in law. There's a fine line between being an aggressor and defending yourself in circumstances. So you've got to be careful about this. I'd urge people to not have a false sense of security by the use of pepper spray. That's where the other laws come in. Can we manage society's behavior? What's the vision for Trinidad that we want that's different? And is it possible, philosophically, if you permit me for a moment? Sexual offenses are a part of our culture. We've been looking at dealing with this, and the rest of the world has. Trinidad and Tobago has, in certain instances, changed its culture by very simple techniques. Let's take this world of vulnerability and let's dare to believe that a new world is possible by simple techniques. Look at what we did for motor vehicle and road traffic. We converted offenses into violations, demerit points. That simple addition of 3 sections into the law, just 3 sections, section 20A, 20B, 20C of the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act, resulted in the lowest number of traffic deaths for 65 years. So in this arena, yes, pepper spray, but the sexual offenses aspects, the registers. Do you want to know who's on a charge, who's a violent offender? Do you want a fighting chance by knowledge? These simple techniques. Do you want to be aware? Pepper spray is a defensive mechanism. We're more into asking the population to encourage the awareness of predators in our environment.
We just want to remind our audience that you can send in your questions via Facebook and Instagram, and we will try to get those questions across to the AG. Now, we had one just a little while ago, and I just want you to clarify that there are some people who still think that pepper spray is intended really for women, that only women can apply. Can you just clarify that this is for all genders
Pepper
across
spray is
the
for
board?
all people above 16 years of age who are not prohibited persons. In fact, I can tell you today, quite a few elderly gentlemen asked me about it, even up to today, on the same point. And I said, yes, pepper spray is for the vulnerable. You can apply, and the system should be up and running in a matter of days, God willing, once we get the paperwork in gear.
You know, you're just making reference to changing our culture. What about those who think, who may end up, hopefully not, using pepper spray as a solution to a verbal argument?
Well, that's why the fine line between offense and defense comes in. But I'm itching to get to the concept of awareness of predators. Because if you keep a monster off of the streets, a monster away from a vulnerable person, that simple focus upon monster management, if I could put it that way, sorry to be brutal in the expression, monster management is part of the solution. The criminal justice system is another part, ensuring that it works faster so that there is an acquittal or a conviction, retribution or salvation. All of those are part of the system, but it starts off with giving us a fighting chance.
You know, what about persons who have certified and uncertified mental health issues? Will they be eligible to apply for a pepper spray license?
There are circumstances where they can be denied. That's why the police will have certain amount of checking. That's why
How are the police going to check for this?
So the reason why we've asked you to go to the police in the areas that you're going to be is that sometimes a bit of checking goes on in terms of the police visiting neighbors, doing investigations, tracing and background aspects become part of this. And that's why the neighborhood connection helps us. Trinidad and Tobago, we all know of a village, a home, an environment where your reputation may or may not speak for you, or people may or may not know things about you. All of these things do form part of it. We allow for the revocation of the pepper spray permit if something untoward happens as well. It is important to remember that this thing is going to work itself out as we get into it, which is why we've gone for the permit side of it as opposed to the legalization side.
What do you anticipate is going to be the response to it once this becomes operationalized? How many people, what are the application numbers going to be like?
That's an interesting point. I'm not quite so certain that it will be that much applied for in some circumstances, but this is really a question that I've been asking myself that I will not have the answer to. I'm quite interested to see what the data is going to be. Let's see what it is. The point is to put the system in.
About what you think the application numbers are going to be is really because do we have the police manpower in order to deal with this part?
That's the beautiful part of it. Online application digitization. You don't have to go into a police station and wait for 45 minutes to fill out a form while it's going on. You upload, you pay for online, the digitization happens and it gets back to you.
But in terms of the research, as you had just mentioned, with police officers having to go and check up on the mental status and mental health of a person and whether or not they're suitable.
It's not going to be that involved where we're going to do a full mental assessment and background check. It's not intended to be the same as the issuance of a firearm, which is why we dealt with it differently.
What is the difference?
The difference is that it is in the firearm process, there are an application for a license, provisional license. You have to have a psychological assessment. Your spouse or significant other has to say yes. They have to do a home visit. They have to do background checks. So firearms are significantly involved in terms of process and granting. On the pepper spray side, it is basically a fill the box out aspect, subject to revocation. And remember, the sting in the tail is if you tell an untruth, if you lie on the form, you're going to be in serious trouble.
So is it going to be easier for someone who already has a firearms user license to be able to apply for pepper spray license?
I think probably yes, because there's a record on and there won't be any revocation. But again, I'm into the other sides. Pepper spray to me is the least of the potentials available on the table right now. I'm more interested and desperately interested in hearing what the population has to say about preventing monsters from walking amongst us.
Well, the population just tapped into us and they sent some questions on Facebook. Jilan says, she asks, is it legal for students to carry pepper spray in schools, secondary schools? What about workplace policies?
So the policies at schools and at the workplace will drive where you store them, how you're permitted to enter, etc. It will be legal. Where you store them upon entry will be different. So some schools have a no phones policy. You check it in and you check it out. That's where the school system is going to come in with the 16-year-olds and over. And the workplace policy, I think that those are much easier to manage in terms of what's in your handbag or your bag.
What about the application costs for these things?
It's $50 TT.
Just let's touch a little bit on the marketplace. I know you had mentioned that you want to turn this into a manufacturing. Potentially a manufacturing. What is your vision for manufacturing pepper spray locally?
We have scorpion pepper, Moruga pepper, some of the best in the world. And we therefore have the ability to do manufacturing right here. We have a burgeoning manufacturing sector. So we didn't go just for the pepper spray permit where you're importing it. It is definitely something that is capable of being manufactured here. And if Trinidad and Tobago has a chance to do that, then the marketplace should be open.
We're already dealing with an overwhelming illegal firearms situation in Trinidad and Tobago. And as you mentioned, so many people already have pepper spray in their possession. What do you anticipate will be the pepper spray black market situation?
I think that this will remove black market because it's so easy to achieve. And secondly, because it's an offense, if you're found with it, you'd rather be on the safe side than not. So it's a matter of the application of the law.
And how soon will this bill be operationalized?
We are looking at within a month, all things being equal, to just have the IT system tested, etc., and then rolled into the market whilst we get the supplies in order and the permissions for the type and quantities.
What are the fines going to be like for illegal possession?
The fines are very significant. They're set out in the law. We have pretty heavy fines right through. In fact, that was the subject of significant debate. Summary conviction, $250,000, 5 years imprisonment, $750,000, 15 years imprisonment for possessing things that are not approved by the minister. Of course, that can be from 0 to those maximums. So they're heavy fines because of the risk factors that are involved here. Because God forbid you put pepper spray into the hands of a criminal and that is used to commit a rape or home invasion, etc. That's why in approaching the issue, we had to be very careful to balance the sword and shield approach.
And right before we move on from pepper spray, what about if a victim is able to slow down a very real perpetrator with illegal pepper spray?
There's always lawful excuse. That is a feature of the law. And lawful excuse for the use of pepper spray is a feature of this act. So there are lots of permutations and combinations. I, as Attorney General, have to be really careful on what I say because we're in the world of editing. And editing sometimes results in people clipping you in the wrong way and taking you in the wrong context. So let's just say that that's a matter for the court, and certainly you can approach the court on those issues.
Let's talk about the national registries for sexual offenders. So there is one that is set up for convicts, as well as one that is set up for persons who are on charges. And within the convicts, there is a national registry which will be available to law enforcement. And there would be certain information on that registry which would not be available to the public. And then there would be the website where certain things are listed. For instance, name, former names, date of birth, a photograph as well, and locality. Okay, so can you tell us just a little bit about how this is going to work in terms of the charges? What happens in the case of a child offender?
So let's split this into two for a moment.
Yeah.
So we have, since 1999, there was a sex offenders registry created theoretically in the Sexual Offences Act. The minute that law was passed, it went to bed. And even though we had thousands of convictions for sexual offences, not a single person was put onto the register. I made it my mission.
And why was that?
Why was that? Because the law was just badly drafted. The law required you, the minute you were convicted, to miraculously find yourself in a police station to go and register as a sex offender. And the judiciary did not do the coordinating positions, and government after government did not pay attention to it. But under this government, we paid very close attention. Whilst we were reforming the criminal justice system and looking at the hard crimes, we wanted to make sure that we used dissuasive techniques. We wanted to give you a fighting chance, and awareness was one of the fighting chances. So I just want to clarify something in your lead-up question. We have a register that we've just amended. So for 20 years, we had a sex offenders registry capability in law with 0 people on it, even though thousands of convictions were there. And I want to remind you that there are convicted sex offenders who have raped 4-month-old babies, 2-year-old children. Not only women we're talking about child offenders and also offenders against children, the most heinous crime you can think of. What we said was, listen, this is not acceptable. When we look to the movement in Trinidad and Tobago that says protect our women, make us feel safe on the street, we look at the vigils and we look at the marches and we say, well, okay, yes, one part of the equation is making the criminal justice system move faster, and that's a different conversation we can have. We are dramatically in the right direction, doubling the amount of the judiciary, specialist courts, whatever, right? But let's look at the monster management. We went and we amended the Sexual Offences Act and we created this National Sex Offenders Registry for convicted persons whose appeals were over. And then we said, okay, that all of that broad information is available to law enforcement, but the public needs to know who is out of jail and is a registered sex offender. And that's why we created the website. We went for locality as opposed to specific address because there can be retaliation inside of this equation. What we propose now, what the gauntlet is being thrown out for, to a simpler version of Trinidad and Tobago, which I should say a lot of people do not support, is this concept: a national sexual charges register. So let's deal with the law. If you are put on a charge for rape and it does not involve a child, or the court does not put a gag order, the newspapers will take a picture of you, XYZ is on a rape charge, appeared in so-and-so court, etc., and the matter goes on. What we are saying right now is, insofar as that's in the public domain already, why should you have to sift through 1,000 newspaper reports if you're going to step into a PH taxi, which we're going to regulate, if you're going to hire somebody and they show no charges which became convictions, so they have a clean certificate of character because there are no convictions if they're only looking for convictions. What we say right now to Trinidad is, what is your opinion? The government has a view that we would like to have for very serious sexual offenses. I'm not just talking rape by itself, which can be a matter of a boyfriend and girlfriend and somebody said yes and somebody said no and they were fighting because it was a setup. We're talking about raping children. We're talking about grievous sexual assault with breaking and entering, with child kidnapping. We're talking about combination offenses. And what we say is, as we move to have registration of drivers on the road in the taxi industry, etc., and I don't want to single them out. This could be airline pilots, this could be somebody working in your home, this could be somebody working in your business. What we are asking for now, which will require 3/5 majority support, is, do you think it is time to change society by having people consciously aware that they will be on a public register if a court says yes? Hear that point. If a court says yes, and that is a policy that we've drafted, we've sent out into the public domain, a lot of lawyers have come back and said no.
How does this jive with the principle of innocent until proven guilty?
Exactly the point. So the lawyers have said the golden thread is that you're innocent and proven guilty. And what we're saying is, that is true, so let's accept it this way. Let us have you subjected to the risk of going on a public register for very aggravated sexual offenses. It's what we call forked lightning, where it's lightning striking in two places at the same time. You have kidnapped somebody, you're in trafficking in persons, and you rape them. Double offenses in one shot. And let a court say why you should not go onto that register. You apply to say, listen, I don't want to go on that register because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we have you treated with by the court. What we say when we look at Trinidad and Tobago, and we look at what we did in the conversion of road traffic offenses to violations, where people are now concerned, is my tint too dark? How many demerit points do I have? They're slowing down. There was a cultural shift.
But when you give everyone an opportunity to appeal to the court to be or not be on the registry, who is going to say, I want to be on this registry?
Let me put it to you this way. If we continue to do the same thing, looking for a different result, in the circumstance where we are in Trinidad and Tobago and we don't take avail of the simple and bold steps that are available with due process, with a court telling you what the safeguards ought to be. So, for instance, this will not apply in a case of incest because of the family connection and structures. But there must be a way, Desha Rambhajan, for us to begin to change this society. People are very aware that in Singapore, if they find drugs in your suitcase, that you are subjected to the death penalty. They are very
victims
aware.
going to be allowed an opportunity to say who goes and who is not
yes.
on
So
the registry
yes,
in the case of incest, for instance?
Well, incest would be out of the case. Child rapes, etc., would be out of the case. So the category of offences that will not be on the register. And of course, victim impact statements, the psychological assessment, the impact factor. But let's start off with the fact of where I started. John Brown, who committed a rape and who goes to court, is published on the newspaper that day. Appeared in court. Usually you see them with a shirt hiding over the head and handcuffs and walking. You've seen it. You're in the media. So if you are reporting that and you did a search and you remembered, hey, on so-and-so day, you can still find that unless a court blocks it. What we want to do is to send a psychological message to Trinidad and Tobago to say that you may very well find yourself, if a court says so, on a register of charges. And these are serious charges.
To what extent will that be a deterrent, you think?
I am convinced that we have a better shot at deterrence with mechanisms like that. And the evidence is to be found in the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act. We saw government after government try to pass a motor vehicle authority, 400 clause bill, 3/5 majority. When I became Attorney General, I said, let's stop with that. Let's pluck out those 3 sections and convert an offense into a violation, civil liability. Let's stop bringing 100 people to court, 100%. The people who want to court, which turned out because of the data to actually be only 30%, let them tell us when they want to come to court. So we shifted resources. It's time for us to see what are we for or against, what can or cannot work. The danger in Trinidad and Tobago society is that we end up in analysis paralysis. I'm not saying take a dangerous approach. I'm asking for the public view on a court saying in an appropriate circumstance for a very heinous matter where there's lightning striking in a forked way, you kidnap somebody and you rape them. You kidnap a child and you raped a child. You were involved in trafficking in persons and you raped someone. That those kinds of matters, if a court says yes, can be the subject of a public register because it's already reported in the papers and press.
Ansel from Facebook wants to know how instantaneous is a person's name going to appear on the registry?
How instantaneously? It'll be when you attend that court. And
so there is a process.
There is a process because obviously you can't be capricious. You have to make sure that you're doing this thing in a measured way so that there's a balancing of rights. Because yes, there will be people who are innocently caught, which is why we didn't go with the basic concept, as heinous as it is, of rape. Because rape is a matter of consent. You may have marital rape. You may have rape in a relationship. And what we wanted to do was to make sure that the court in all of those circumstances said that specifically because we have specialist courts now. What we have is the Family and Children Division and the Criminal Division, and there is a dedicated arm of special position. And remember, for those people who don't have attorneys at law, we have opened the criminal aspect of the public defender. So we have a brand new division that was nowhere in Trinidad and Tobago before this government brought it to life. That is a public defender. If your attorney is not available, the state will represent you, and vigorously at that.
And what about if later on down the road there is rehabilitation? This sex offender who was once on the registry can now apply to have his name taken off.
Yes, that is a feature of the law. And I should add that we have a parole program. So we are introducing the concept of parole because to be qualified for parole, you have to enroll in programs. You have to graduate from programs. You have to be assessed as being performing in the right direction. But let me just be raw for a moment. How has the world of sexual offences been working for Trinidad and Tobago? Have we seen less rapes? Less violence? Where are we? We are not seeing the kind of cultural shifting that the country needs to see for a number of reasons. The speed of the criminal justice system, which was an issue which we've been attending to, and which is going better, but it's not fast enough yet because people want to know how they feel in this situation. If I were to do an average poll of the average citizen in this country and say, do you feel safe? Are you comfortable with your daughter or your young son getting into a taxi and finding his or her way to someplace there? You panic because there's this sense of, I need to do more. I need to be careful. And what we're trying to do here is to give that satisfaction. Cameras everywhere, regulate the PH industry and the taxi industry, quicken the court pace. But what about the deterrence factor? If we can get people to slow down on the road by the use of demerit points, which are fairly public, you mean to tell me that we can't slow down raping and criminality by making sure that people are consciously aware of what can happen to you if you're on a register?
Having your name on your photograph up is one thing, but you also mentioned locality. What do you mean by locality?
So we won't have
your
locality
street
on the register. So we won't have Faris Al-Rawi living at X address. We won't have that on the sexual charges register. But your photograph, the particulars of the offense, those things will be categorized. Because I'll tell you this, for hardworking parents who are in the public service and who have to leave their kids at home,
they need to know who's living on their street,
yeah.
though.
How do you know who's working with you? How do you know who's in your home? Who is your gardener?
Or in your apartment building.
Who is somebody coming to lend a hand to you to paint the house, etc., or in your apartment? We need to have a fighting chance. The society needs to be made aware of certain things, particularly when we have unofficial registers already in existence.
What sexual offences have corporal punishment as a form of punishment?
Well, what an interesting one. So yeah, I drafted a bill which I sent out. There is a Corporal Punishment Act in Trinidad and Tobago. It is corporal punishment offenders over 18 amendments. We've drafted that. The law is already that you can be subjected to corporal punishment for rape for a number of factors. And the law has been applied. The Catalan has been the subject of investigation by the courts. The modern view on the law is that corporal punishment is abhorrent and ought not to be used. It seems to work very well in certain other countries.
Like which countries?
Mostly in the Middle East, you certainly have it. In Commonwealths or countries that ascribe to Commonwealth type laws. In Singapore, you have it. In India, you have it. There are a number of jurisdictions that do have flogging.
When was the last
punishment.
time someone was flogged like that?
In the 90s.
Trinidad?
In Trinidad. I forget the case offhand. It was the subject of a constitutional position as to whether the Catalan, because it had multiple limbs, equal to more strokes than were prescribed. It's a very, how should I say, it's a very avant-garde or risky approach. There are very differing points of view. The Law Association has written back to say it is unconscionable that you would even contemplate physical punishment in today's world. But there are many people who said, bring it on. The question is, where do we stand as a society? I feel confident that people will try to test it. It's not something that is at the forefront of our agenda. It was done for discussion purposes to poll where we stood on it. What's
been the feedback from your stakeholders?
Stakeholders are very interested in the concepts that we have yet to touch on, in the voyeurism, revenge pornography, taking and sharing images, etc., because we're into now some other areas that we've not been able to get the opposition to agree to. Whistleblowing, anonymous witness evidence, cybercrime. The Media Association has had very strong views against the cybercrime legislation. I should tell you, my colleague from Guyana, the previous Attorney General, said to me, "Hey, Faris, thanks for drafting the cybercrime bill. We passed it into law." And he laughed at me. My colleagues in the Caribbean have used umpteen laws that we have drafted that we can't pass in Trinidad and Tobago because the opposition will not support it. And in some cases, I understand the media's pushback. I don't agree with them that there needs to be an exception for the media. There needs to be a qualified approach. So what we did is we took those concepts and we introduced it into another issue which is of serious concern for me, something which I believe the government believes can have a serious effect on our country in taking us to a better position. A simple idea, that is, let's accept that technology is part of our lives. That cameras, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter are parts of our life. That our most vulnerable and not yet fully matured, that is our teenagers and young children, are the victims in waiting in this environment. And let's look at the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, which have no criminal offenses of a very pointed type, because we have cybercrime in certain ways in the Computer Misuse Act, sure, and you can commit certain sexual offenses in certain other ways. But we don't have a really pointed law that treats with suicide, emotional embarrassment, about the true vulnerability of that whole large sector of our society, our kids, let alone our women, let alone our men, people who are blackmailed by somebody taking a video which they thought was in private, or they didn't know a camera was installed while they engaged in sexual activity or private acts. Those things are front and center in another amendment which we propose to the Sexual Offences Act. And that is 3 types. Use of technology in voyeurism. What is voyeurism? You're basically getting sexual gratification for yourself or for someone else.
Peeping Toms.
Peeping Toms. You install a camera, people have live services, etc. So that's 1, voyeurism. 2, we have the issue of taking and sharing intimate images on a video. Somebody had sexual relations, they were involved in other aspects of sexual activity, they expected it to be in private. Somebody took the image, knowingly took it, knew that it was going to be in confidence, and then shared it. And then we also have another category of somebody sharing images which they know the other person doesn't approve of, or they're threatening them. I can tell you as a matter of fact that I have been witness to teenage suicide in certain circumstances, and no one has sought to treat with it. And this is something that we feel very passionate about, and that we want the population to speak about. Because if you read the front page of the newspapers, you really don't see these issues being discussed.
So how are you planning to tackle the issue of someone sharing a photograph or video, revenge porn, as we would call it?
Criminal liability. So if you take or you share a video image, or you alter a video image or a picture to put your face on somebody else's activity or my face on someone else's activity, and you know that that person doesn't consent, or you've willfully done this thing to cause embarrassment and shame to people, that ought to be a criminal offense. And we feel for the hundreds of people or thousands of people that turned up and said, government, do more. These things have been on the table. But when you ask for the particulars, well, what more do you support this? We're not getting the feedback on the potential solutions that lie in front of us. And this is where we want the population in spaces such as this to have a view and to express their point of view.
Well, we have a question coming in from Beena Singh. She writes to us from Instagram. She says, my neighbor looks at my daughter through her window. Is this, now illegal? Can the police do something to him now when I report it?
So it's not yet illegal. Voyeurism will be something that is caught by something like that. Obviously, somebody who lives in very close proximity to someone else may be an innocent infringer. The real connection here is to sexual gratification, but also there needs to be a degree of pushback.
But how do you prove that someone is using your image or peeping on you for sexual gratification?
So I was just coming to the point that people need to feel a degree of fear that you may be tripping a law. So, for instance, when you put your foot straight down to the floorboard in your car, you are now conscious that you may be speeding, particularly if you see blue lights along the way. So it'll be a matter of proof that sexual gratification was involved. It just wasn't the neighbor passing by, etc.
Is this a he say, she say situation?
Remember, we now have concepts of cameras. So it's no longer he say, she say. It can also be the video captured the following. And here it is.
So wouldn't it be the victim now taking video of the peeping Tom?
Not if it's in the confines of careful parameter. You write, you warn. you make a complaint. You now have, imagine if you say, look, I fear that this is going on, and the police come knowing that there's an offense potentially and knock on your door and say, listen, we have a report of X going on. That's going to cause a reaction of care and caution, sometimes anger, sometimes it wasn't me, sometimes clarification, but there's now an alert. It's like hearing somebody being beaten. You know, all of us know of stories of somebody who has been a victim of domestic violence or some form of abuse. But you hardly ever hear it that it's in my family. You know, an aunt, or you know, a neighbor, or a cousin, or somebody away. We're still not in the place, understandably, where we're talking about it at home. In doing the abolition of child marriage, we came across a lot of data on incest in this country, which is not being spoken about. The first solution to these problems is identification and then treating with it by a prescription. And the prescription here is creating an offense which can at least ring a bell. You may not be guilty, but society begins to be aware that you may be tripping a law, and therefore you have a methodology of treating with it.
How would voyeurism law be taken in the context of carnival, where there might be suggestive...
Got you.
Where
we had a long discussion on that.
Behavior happening.
Yeah.
There are a lot of photographers, there are a lot of videographers on the street. They take that video and perhaps publish it on places where it shouldn't go, adult websites and so on.
So once you're on the street, you're not in private. Voyeurism relates to somebody as a peeping Tom when you are in a position where you expect to be private. So that is the difference. So we had a lot of discussion on it in terms of the carnival context. You know, you can't complain that somebody took a picture of your underwear if you're in your underwear on the street in carnival.
Right.
So obviously there is a different aspect. By the way, voyeurism law exists in other parts of the Commonwealth, so we're not reinventing the wheel. We have umpteen precedents from New Zealand and elsewhere that help us to distinguish these aspects. But we did look at it from the carnival perspective quite carefully.
When it comes to revenge porn and a person who initially shares a video or photograph on social media and then 100 other people share that video and photograph, do they become culpable as well?
Well, I can tell you this. In our LRC meeting, we had a big discussion on innocent infringement and on people that receive blasts of WhatsApps, for instance. You know, people send you, my phone has thousands and thousands of messages every day, and I sometimes don't know who has sent me what. And you may therefore find yourself having received something. This is intended to be something that stops that kind of behavior, stops the sharing of it, because you're now alerted to the fact that you may be sharing something that ought not to be shared. You can't be reckless. You have to, by the way, the offense is drafted so that
But there are a lot of people are going to be like, how are they going to catch me? Are they going to catch 100 people? Are they going to arrest all of us?
Well, first of all, we've put a mental intention to the offense that you must knowingly do this, knowing that somebody didn't consent. The second aspect is that has been tried and tested. 100 people could be speeding on the highway and one person gets stopped. That one person will get charged. So
right.
It isn't that the 99 that followed need to be charged.
Set an example.
You have to set an example.
We have an interesting question coming in from Suzanne. She writes to us from Twitter. Can I report my husband who does not know that I know he's recording me? I don't know what he's doing with it.
Yes, you can. So a long time ago in the Sexual Offences Act, we removed the exceptions of husband and wife. There was a point in time when you didn't have marital rape. Those things were amended. If you believe that these circumstances exist, yes, it does form part of the offence package.
How do you plan to treat with voyeurism at school? Every young person has a camera now.
Yes, and therefore a cultural attitude adjustment will happen. This is not something that is alien to Canada or to New Zealand or to the United Kingdom, which is now looking at it. We're talking about, Desha, you've hit the nail on the head. We're talking about changing or adjusting our culture and our cultural approach to making Trinidad and Tobago a slightly safer place.
Just getting back to the sexual offenders, I mean, all of this falls into it. How many sexual offenders are there currently?
Right now, we have one on the register, and we could not include the thousands that went before, because they were not put on. The thousands that went before and who were set free and out of jail, even though we know who they are and we're building a registered database which law enforcement will have, they are not public because we couldn't pass the law retroactively to capture those people.
Why
because
not?
they're out of the system. The judge, I'm going to use a phrase in law, the judge has funked us. The judge's role has ended and the person's sentence has been passed and finished. And part of their sentence was not that they be put on a sexual offences register. So what happened is the governments previously, prior to Dr. Rowley's government, just dropped the ball. And despite what they say, unfortunately, it was not attended to.
We have another question coming in, Jonathan from IG. In terms of local people on the site, OnlyFans, if I share their footage that is already out there on the site, is that illegal?
Good question. And if that's Jonathan Bagan, in particular, I'd say to Jonathan, who's been an advocate of pushing a sex offenders register, there has been an attempt to put an unofficial register together. The danger is, of course, that you may subject yourself to defamation. Obviously, defamation does not arise if you're telling the truth. So that is the one caution, which is why we don't want to leave it to the risk of someone putting together a register, which may be permissible, but which may open that person to defamation, etc.
So we have seen on the internet people putting, cameras in changing rooms and so on. And sometimes they'll put it in the changing room, I would like to think, to deal with shoplifting, maybe for other reasons as well. But would that be a violation?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
what if they actually catch somebody shoplifting?
Well, you see, that's where alternate forms would have to go. If there's a sign up that says you may be recorded, I don't think anybody would even shop there. So that's just a no-no. You can deal with shoplifting in other ways. You can physically inspect, you can present bags, you can look at clothing. But I don't think that we should be in the position of accepting in society that people ought to be able to see you undress and you're not aware of it.
We're coming up close to the end of time. We're supposed to wrap this discussion up at 9 o'clock. Is there anything else that you would want to touch on as it relates to the sexual offences?
Yes, I very much want to be able to approach the Parliament with response data onto the AG's platform, if you can, by telling us your views. This world of cyberspace allows us a reach and an ability to fashion issues that can help to change our society. If you look towards your leaders, if you look towards persons in government from time to time, and you ask them to do more, some of it comes by way of a groundswell. And part of the groundswell that we're asking people to tune into on sexual offences in particular is, what is your view on the pros and cons of a sexual offences register, a sexual charges register, of no bail for people who are in forked lightning? You kidnap and rape. You're trafficking in persons and you rape. You entered into a trespass situation. You broke into an old person's home and you raped them. The other day we had an 89-year-old woman raped by somebody who broke into her home. What's your view on that? You see, law is much more than government and opposition. And law is much more than the law association. I say that with the greatest of respect. Lawyers are well-heeled, well-schooled and well-heeled. But law is not how we change society in its purest sense. We have to use law to change society by addressing a mischief. What is wrong with our society, and how do we begin to usher the society into a new place? So my simple request on the sexual offences aspect is to ask Trinidad and Tobago and elsewhere, what's your view? What do you stand for?
And how are you going to get these views? I mean, this is a platform, and a lot of the comments, perhaps not all that was shared here today, but you would have a collection of all of them. Would those comments be used, or what are the other platforms that are being used to get comments? We're going to put forward a couple tools. We're going to put forward some surveys, which will be on the AGLA's page, the Attorney General's page, and we'd ask you to participate in those surveys. We have a phenomenal team of young, energetic, amazing young women and young men, but mostly young women,
I shout them out. We have Solange D'Souza, we have Farzana Nazir Mohammed, we have Tanil Ramkisoon, we have Crystal Madhu Singh, we have Viana Sharma, all women. Jason Das, I'll throw your name in. We have Law Reform Commission. But we've got some team leaders, Nirana Parasan on the prison side. We have an aggressive team of people who are collating data. So we're going to ask you to participate in our surveys a lot more. What we want to do is we want to stoke the conversation. After the protest, what's next? What do you stand for? What do you support? What are you going to call out? This is not opposition and government kumbaya, you know. It's what the people deserve. And part of what people deserve is how they feel and how they express it.
Half of what we discussed here today is still out with stakeholder consultation.
So this is the last end of the stakeholder consultation. We'd like to approach the Parliament quite quickly on the register, charges register, definitely on voyeurism, definitely on revenge pornography, definitely on bail. On the bail, it's a 3/5 majority. I'm going to need the country's help in a groundswell to say, do you believe that people who are aggressive sexual predators ought to have bail restrictions? Not that they're denied bail, but that the court can tell them that they ought to show cause why they should have bail. Remember, all of this is plugged in to the PH industry, to the taxi industry, as we digitize that industry. And we still have a massive package on sexual harassment. We've drafted the sexual harassment law. So the AG's office is very busy. And what we want to do is we want to open our doors to this form of discussion and feedback.
Well, this is just the first in the series that your team has prepared. And some of the topics that you would have just touched on will be discussed moving forward.
We have refugee returners, we have parole, we have fighters, returners as we call them in the other context, that is ISIS fighters, etc. We have the cyber legislation, we have whistleblowing protection, we have the suite of follow the money packages.
Death penalty, you know,
we
that
have
is a favorite
the categorization of murder. We have so much to report to the country on as we look to the big issues of transforming society through simple techniques.
So what is next on the agenda?
Next on the agenda, our team is going to focus on that. I'll give you some teasers a little bit later. I'd love to turn towards the death penalty because we've done the public defenders division.
I feel like that is a conversation that arises, that raises its head every now and then. People ventilate, they vent in public. We have marches, we have everything. The newspapers are filled with the discussions on it. And then it goes silent.
Yeah, but I'm coming to you with data. I'm coming to you with data. The big difference is I'll be able to tell you numbers, management, and structures. This government has made it part of its course that we tell you the data. $25,000 per head per prisoner, 1,127 prisoners in for murder awaiting trial, 43 magistrates, 36 judges, now 64. We could tell you the data because unless you're measuring it, you can't perform the solutions. So a lot of these discussions are going to be in the context of what the data is and what kind of vision we want Trinidad and Tobago to aspire to. Where do we see ourselves? So we want to meet you where you are, we the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and carry you along a vision that we can agree upon. Well,
AG, it's been a quick 1 hour and we've already reached to the end of our segment.
Well, just let me say it's AGLA Talks at 868 Gmail. We want to send out, if you look on our page, you'll see the links that we can do these things for. Thanks for letting me just throw that inside of there. Desha, can I just say to you in particular, thank you for lending your voice, your intellect, your brand to a conversation, to an interrogation that is unfiltered. What we're going to try to do in our other versions is to open the mic, so there'll be a few sessions where we get it raw and unfiltered. I've been in places and spaces where 3,000, 4,000 people are in attendance and the questions come. We are unscripted. We are open at the mic. We're here to answer the questions. We want to hear the fors and against, and we'd like to encourage issue identification in a very different way. So thank you from the Attorney General's
office. The goal
office.
And the intention of this segment was achieved, and that is ensuring that the public gets an opportunity to understand in a different way what is being done to ensure their protection and the protection of their loved ones.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So Trinidad and Tobago, elsewhere in the world, let's make this a different place. Let's let philosophy meet action. Let's take Trinidad and Tobago step by step into a better position. Desha, we love you at this office, so we're going to ask you if you'd come back and help us through as we move along.
As long as I'm
work.
invited, I will be happy to lend my voice to ensure that the people of Trinidad and Tobago get what they want, which is an opportunity to be heard and to be protected and to feel comfortable in their country. So thank you very much, Trinidad and Tobago, for tuning in via Instagram, via Facebook, and other forms of social media. Thank you, and thank you for having me.
And please share the live. Share it widely, and let's start the conversation.
Okay, will do. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Extremely grateful.